It's better to have a little with peace than a lot with chaos. One time I was praying and I told the Lord I wanted $1 million. And he said to me, "You don't know what you're asking for." And I said, "Well, of course I know what I'm asking for. I'm asking for $1 million. And he repeated it again. He said, "No, son, you don't know what you're asking for." And so after the second time, I asked him, "Well, then what is it that I don't understand?" Because it seemed like a pretty straightforward request to me. And he asked me a question. He said, "How much money can you consume in one day?" Which in itself is a strange question, but what I understood it to mean was, how much could you spend on things that you can personally consume or use? So for example, you can only wear one pair of shoes at a time. So if I wear 100 pairs of shoes, I would have to have enough locations where it would make sense to change shoes 100 times in the course of one day in order to utilize all of those shoes. There's only so much food a person can eat in a day before they get sick, and so there's a limit on how much money I could actually spend on food in any particular given day. And so the question was, how much money could I consume physically, personally, as an individual in a single day? Now, of course, you could go into extraordinary excess and you could spend $1 million on a shirt and do stupid things like that. But obviously, to contextualize this question, I considered it through a lens of reasonable things. You know, the types of clothes that I might wear in one day, types of shoes I might wear in one day, and types of foods I might eat, even if I went to kind of the far ends of the extreme and I wanted to eat like some very high-end foods. Even that, you can only eat so much of that type of high-end food on a regular basis before it'll make you sick. And so taking all of those things into consideration, concluded without going into great excess, about $500 a day was probably the max I could reach or reasonably consume within one day, which scaled out over the course of a year comes up to about $200,000. And so what the Lord said to me is, he said, everything that you have beyond what you can use becomes a responsibility. It's not something that is for you to consume at that point. You now have to do something with those resources, because those resources don't just sit. They have to move or they lose value. That's how money works. If money sits and does nothing, it loses value due to inflation. That's the whole parable of the sower. It's why the man that buried the money in the ground, the master was angry with that servant, because the time that it spent in the ground, it was useless, and he could have at least put it into a bank where it would have been gaining interest, but instead it was losing value because it was in the ground and doing nothing. And so he said to me, what I have to understand is that when you ask for more than what you need, you're not asking for money, you're asking for responsibility. And every responsibility that you have, it takes from your time, it takes from your emotions, it takes from your mental bandwidth, it takes from your ability to engage with other things. Perfect example would be, I lived in a 4,000 square foot house for a few years. And during the time of living in that house, we didn't have the resources to be able to pay somebody to take care of all of the things in the house. And so much of it we ended up having to take care of. And there came a point where I realized that the time that it was requiring me to keep the house up was not worth the time that it took away from other things that I wanted to do. Like I wanted to write, I wanted to spend time with my kids. There were other things that were important to me to spend my time doing. And I had to choose between letting the house completely fall apart and just fall into just an absolute mess, as opposed to going and doing the other things that I wanted to do. And it's this way with everything that you own. Everything that we own has a cost associated to it. The things that you own truly do own you. And this isn't to say that we shouldn't own things. There's nothing wrong with owning things. There's nothing wrong with having a lot, right? But we have to understand that everything that we own, it is going to take from us to own that thing. Whether it takes the time and mental capacity that goes into putting people and systems in place to manage it, or whether it takes directly from us having to manage it ourselves. Everything that we own owns us to some degree. Now, I say this because there is a grace to own things. There is a grace for handling wealth. It says that when Jesus gave us gifts, he gave us gifts in accordance with the measure of grace that he provided us. And so one person has a measure of grace to handle tremendous amounts of wealth, whereas another person only has the grace to manage a small portion. One person has the grace to serve at a great capacity. They're the person who you could wake them up at 2 o'clock in the morning and they'll be right there to your house to help you change it, pick you up from the side of the road. And there seems to be no end to the amount at which they can serve, because the measure of grace for them to operate in that gift is extraordinary. But the problem is that we don't tend to think of having wealth as a gift, or the ability to manage wealth as a grace. We tend to think of this as something that's inherent. Everybody should have wealth. Everybody should aspire to have great amounts of resources, great amounts of things, right? We all aspire to have a lot, to have things that are valuable. But you have to understand that things that are valuable are expensive to maintain. If you have gold, you need a safe to keep it. If you have a $100,000 car, it costs you $5,000 to change a windshield instead of $2,000 or $1,000. The more valuable a thing is, the more cost there is to protect it and to keep it. And so there must be the grace in order to carry that thing. And we also need to understand that the more we have, the more it will require of us. And so what I'm hoping to share with you is that be satisfied with what the Lord has provided. And if you feel a draw to have more, understand that more is a responsibility to manage. It is not simply for your own consumption, because you can only consume so much in a day. And everything that you have over and above what you can consume now becomes your responsibility to manage for the benefit of others. Because supply, resource, is for everyone. If there's a well, the well is not simply for you, because you can't drink all of the water in that well. The well is for everyone. A portion of that well is for you. A portion of the fruit from the tree is for you. But the tree itself is for everyone. And so the person who owns the tree has the responsibility of the distribution of the fruit of that tree, of the water, the supply of that well. They have the responsibility now for the distribution of that for the benefit of everyone. So before you ask for wealth, before you ask for more supply, understand how much you can consume in a day. And if you have sufficient supply, if you have enough, then be aware of what you're asking for. There's nothing wrong with asking for greater responsibility. Paul even says we should. We should ask for greater gifts. We should ask for more. We should ask for more responsibility. But know what you're asking for. Because with that comes the necessity for greater character. God will not give you more supply, more resource, more responsibility without the character to carry it well for the benefit of others. Because if he gives it to you, it will either destroy you or it will destroy the people around you. And so with the request for greater supply will come the trial and the tribulation to prepare your character so that you are able to manage it well. So whatever you're asking for today, I just want you to consider, am I asking for this because I truly need it and it is something that I have the ability to consume? It is something that I can actually utilize? Or am I asking for greater responsibility? And do I want to give up the part of my life that will be necessary to manage that thing? The more you have, the less free you are. The less you have, the more free you are. Giving up freedom for responsibility is a great thing. We need people who are responsible. We need strong leaders who are willing to stand into the gap. But that's why leadership is a service. See, leaders commonly make the mistake of thinking that leadership is about ruling over others. It's not. Leadership is about serving others. Because when you are responsible, then you are giving up a portion of your life and your time for the benefit of those that you have been made responsible for. And now you may point and say, well, not all leaders operate that way. That's why it says in Scripture that the slave and the master share the same master, and to each they will give an account. And so those leaders out there who seem to be benefiting from ruling over others and not actually serving them from the position that they have, those leaders, those rulers, they will give an account to the actual master that we all give an account to. And so with that responsibility comes the accountability to rule well, to lead well, to serve well. It's all God's. Everything that we have in this life is His. We are merely stewards of His resources in this place. And so everything that we have a responsibility for how we steward it. As it says, he who is given much, of much will be expected. So, be careful what you ask for. Don't overvalue having more, and don't undervalue having freedom. It is good to desire responsibility. It is good to desire wealth. It is good to desire more. But just make sure you know what you're asking for.